So, the plan might have been to release this on October 3rd. If I'd remembered about October 3rd and the fact that that's important, but I forgot, and look at where we are now. It's just getting released on some random day now. Horrible mistakes. Would have been so much fun. Could have been so spicy. Could have dropped it and people would have been like, "Oh Lord, it's so relevant and topical. You dropped it on October 3rd." But I missed it. Well, friends, with that out of the way, before we get back to comparing 2003 with Brotherhood, there's one more episode of 2003 to go through. It's an episode that I absolutely adore, and that until I looked it up on the Fullmetal Alchemist wiki, I had thought was an anime original episode. But apparently it's based on some bonus chapters of the manga. See, this is where things start to get tricky. They're called bonus chapters, which implies that they don't really matter much in the overall story. And so much of what makes chapters important is where they're placed in the manga, so what do I do? Do I compare them? I don't know. Honestly, there aren't really any big differences I noticed between how the anime adapts them and what is specifically shown in the manga. In the manga, that stuff also just doesn't really matter much. It's just some fun extra stuff. But in the anime, they work it into the structure specifically to the point where it's actually really quite important. After all, it's not called a bonus episode in the anime. It's treated just like any other episode, and for good reason, because it's fantastic. When I think of why I love 2003 so much, I often think of episode 13. For some reason, it was this moment in 2003 where I definitely felt like there was something really great about it while I was watching it, and then it was an improvement over Brotherhood in a lot of ways. In retrospect, I clearly had a ton of other reasons to feel this way, but I remember finishing this episode with my girlfriend and just being ecstatic about how fantastic it was. This was the episode that made me think back to the rest of 2003 and realize just how much it had added to Brotherhood and the manga. The most important aspect of this episode is how much we learn about Mustang. Despite his emphasis in the story, up until now, Mustang has been a pretty distant figure who occasionally appears to do this or that. Other than the coldness he exudes, which I've mentioned in previous episodes of this video series, we haven't seen that much of him in his overall goals or ideals. This episode pretty much opens with Ed describing how obnoxious Mustang's welcome will be for him and Al. Since this is post-time skip, it's important to see that Ed's and Mustang's relationship hasn't changed all that much. This gives us the sense that Mustang is some judgmental figure that looms over the brothers' heads. Of course, this is confirmed when Ed meets Mustang, and Mustang goes over all of Ed's exploits, which are things he really shouldn't know about, given that Ed's been all over the place. He's keeping a tight rope on Ed. He's watching and he's in control. The power dynamic here is incredibly clear. Once again, this makes Ed feel like he's up against opposition around every corner. It makes a lot of sense then why Ed is hesitant to trust anyone other than Al. In Brotherhood and the manga, Mustang really isn't this sort of character. Not in the same way he is in 2003 at least. I mean, there's always this implied power in those versions. Of course, Mustang is above Ed, both in age and rank, but Mustang rarely seems to hold that above Ed in any way that goes beyond a joke. Overall, he's just a fair and just figure who wants the boys to succeed in their quest. Regardless of anything else we may think about Mustang, it is always pretty clear that he's on Ed's and Al's side if at all possible, and will do what he can to help them get their bodies back. In 2003, Mustang is much less supportive of the brothers' goal. He even goes so far as to tell Ed to settle down and reminds Ed that they haven't found the Philosopher's Stone in 3 years. When Ed asks Mustang about Marco, Mustang simply says that he'll look into it. While it's understandable that Mustang wouldn't necessarily want to just hand out Marco's whereabouts, it's just really odd that he would both dissuade the brothers from going after the Philosopher's Stone and not tell them about Marco. Of course, there are multiple reasons why he may act this way, ranging from wanting to use them as tools to wanting to keep a closer eye on them to being genuinely worried about their safety. But we don't know what his reason is, and in Ed's mind, it's pretty clear that he thinks Mustang is just a necessary obstacle. All of this leads to Ed challenging Mustang to a battle. If Ed wins, Mustang needs to tell him Marco's location. It's an interesting and fun scenario to use in order for us to see two of the show's strongest characters go head to head, and Ed's been given a really good reason for wanting to beat Mustang. Sure, Mustang helped them get to where they are today, but Mustang's been overworking Ed under the threat of letting their secret out, which is actually really messed up if you think about it. He's hanging this traumatic moment over the brothers' heads just as a means to reach his ends, I guess. However, for me at least, I still found plenty of reasons to like Mustang. For one, he has his funny moments in this episode, like where he goes on this huge spiel about how much he loves dogs, or where he talks about how he's going to make all the female officers wear miniskirts. It gives him a great sense of depth and a certain sense of charisma. It's also easy to almost view him as an underdog, seeing as people boo when it's announced that he's fighting. Sure, this moment is funny when they boo him, but it is important. People don't like Mustang, yet still he perseveres. It helps bring us over into his side of the court a little bit. Then there's the moment where he could beat Ed, but he's reminded of the war in Ishval. I love this moment so much. So far, if nothing else, Mustang has seemed like an unbreakable force and a strong, consistent character. Yet here he's made weak due to the horrible things he's done and the trauma that's dug its roots deep into his brain. 2003 is definitely interested in taking its characters into dark states mentally, as we'll see more and more as the series continues. This is something both Brotherhood and the manga get into, but it's not treated in quite the same way. But we'll get into that more another time. Either way, seeing Mustang's trauma now allows us to make connections between him and Ed. They really aren't all that different. They're trying to fix the mistakes of their past and doing basically whatever they can to do so. And as they clean up the mess they've made after their fight, they come to a clearer understanding of each other. Not only that, but them cleaning up this mess reminds me in a lot of ways of how this series is going to end, with Mustang and Ed cleaning up the homunculi together in a lot of ways. Yet in this scene, the shots consistently emphasize distance between Ed and Mustang. Despite all their similarities, they are very different people with very different ideals. But they still come to their understanding, and Mustang tells Ed where Marco is. After all of this, we learn that Mustang doesn't want to tell Ed and Al about what has become of Lowart. After all, Lowart has become this insane battleground, in some ways due to what Ed and Al did there. Is this what's best for them, though? To leave them in the dark? I'm not so sure. Either way, though, it shows that Mustang wants to let Ed keep his confidence and some of his innocence. Indeed, even if Ed thinks he's lost everything, there's still more to lose. However, 2003 does something really interesting here. Even as Mustang tries to preserve some of the brothers' innocence, we see how they're developing a bit of a colder and more focused view of the world. I didn't mention it earlier because I was so caught up in Mustang stuff, but at the beginning of this episode, Al finds this little adorable cat, and I love cats. They're so nice. Yeah, I love this moment, first of all, obviously because I love cats, and it's also a near perfect way of showing how Al operates. He just can't leave that kitten out in the rain like that. What kind of monster would do that? As a fellow cat lover, I can definitely relate to this. On top of that, there's this great little flashback where we see Ed going to their mother to try and keep the cat as Al watches. Al, by keeping this cat, is mimicking his brother's actions in the past. By leaving the cat later, he's committing to his and his brother's mutual agreement to leave their more innocent past behind in order to get their bodies back. I mean, the show even has Ed make the cat a stroller to sit in. That's how much the creators wanted us to know that this cat is some sort of symbol for leaving innocence behind. Never mind the fact that Al literally keeps the cat inside his body. I really love this type of stuff, and I love how it's juxtaposed with Mustang trying to preserve their innocence. It's just something he can't do. No one can do that. These boys have already made their decision. And then we're shown what the boys are moving towards. Scar. And they really managed to make him seem intimidating here. The low, creeping chance as we see Scar standing over an officer's dead body, it's just so damn intimidating. Anyway, now that we've got through most of that, we're ready to bring Brotherhood and the manga back in for some more stuff. At this point in the story, Brotherhood and the manga start to become really similar in a lot of ways, so if I'm talking about Brotherhood and the manga at the same time, I'm just going to refer to them as Mangahood, which sounds goofy, but whatever. Wait, do you hear that sound? It's a new OP. Wait a minute. That reminds me, I never even talked about the first OP. Maybe another time? If you want me to focus on that one too, let me know in the comments and I'll do OP analysis as well in a separate episode. I don't know. Anyway, episode 14 of 2003 is when we really get the sense that the plot is moving towards something other than Ed and Al simply finding the Philosopher's Stone. There's this scene at the start of it, a scene that's in all versions of Fullmetal Alchemist, but I think it's handled best in 2003. The homunculi stand over the runes of Lowart, watching as people kill each other and destroy what was once their homes. We are shown that, in some way, the homunculi are manipulating events and manipulating our heroes. There are some things to dig into in the scene as far as the homunculi's personalities are concerned, but I'm going to save that for an episode where I just do character analysis of all of them. Next up, Ed and Al go on their hunt for Marco. Or, well, at least in 2003 they do. In Mangahood, as I mentioned at the end of the last episode, they just kind of run into him, which propels the story forward but isn't nearly as interesting as them actively searching for him and coming to discover who he is. In all versions, Ed and Al go through the town Marco lives in, and they talk to various townspeople, and we get a real sense of how much they depend on and need Marco. They also, upon finding Marco, are threatened by him with a gun. He shoots at them, and they just try to convince him to calm down. In Mangahood, Armstrong is there with them when this happens, and he ultimately forces Marco to calm down. However, in 2003, Armstrong isn't there, and the boys have to deal with this unfortunate situation on their own. This is yet another way that 2003 shows us how alone the brothers are in their quest. They aren't getting nearly as much help from anybody else as they do in Mangahood. In 2003, as Marco recounts some of what he did during the Ishval War, this amazing piece of music plays, a harmonica humming out a soft, sorrowful melody. Throughout the scene, the tension between Ed, Al, and Marco is palpable. As Marco tells the boys some of what has happened, we cut to Rose in Lowart. Just as Marco aided in creating death and destruction in Ishval, the boys have aided in creating death and destruction in Lowart. Instead of being shown the Philosopher's Stone by Marco and just choosing not to take it from him by force, Ed manages to actually find it behind a wall. Al runs over and grabs Ed, telling him that what he's doing is wrong and that they aren't going to steal it. There's just so much going on in this scene, both thematically and character-wise, and I love it. In Brotherhood, there's nothing really wrong with this scene. It just feels kind of routine again. They talk with Marco. Marco tells them that they aren't going to get what they want, and then they leave. However, just as they're about to board the train, Marco gives them a note that tells them where they can go to find his research materials. Again, there's nothing really that wrong with this. It's all fine. It's just not as interesting as what happens in 2003. See, in Mangahood, the boys have already been attacked by Scar. In 2003, that stuff still needs to go down, and it's about to. Instead of getting attacked by Lust outright like he is in Mangahood, Marco is captured by this jackass, the same guy who tried to take Nina away, who's apparently just been following Ed around. The jackass gives off some weird exposition that's really not necessary, which was reserved for Marco in Mangahood and felt more natural that way. I will say that I never really understood this guy's deal in 2003. I mean, I understand his purpose within the story. He has his role, which we'll get to soon, but as far as being his own character, he's really not. He just serves as a mouthpiece for the government at large, and a really, really corrupt one at that. In other words, I'm saying that he's a pretty bad character, both in terms of his actions and in terms of his characterization and execution itself. But having him around does result in some great moments, like when Marco is carted away by the government and the townspeople watch with this look of confusion and distress. Yet again, we're seeing the destruction accidentally enacted by Ed and Al as they search for the Philosopher's Stone. So Marco's taken away, as Ed and Al chase after him. Then enters Scar. He blows up the car this jackass is driving and then just immediately kills him. Honestly, the scene's a bit goofy, in the sense that it's hard to believe that this supposedly amazing warrior would just be killed so easily. But I guess it's possible, and structurally, this moment is really sound. After all, this guy has been a consistent thorn in Ed and Al's side. He's been built up as a villain, maybe even a major villain, for the brothers to fight against. And then he's just killed, without all that much fanfare or all that much emphasis. The battle between Ed, Al, and Scar is far longer in 2003, which is a really good thing. It allows for moments like when Scar says that Ed's eyes remind him of his brothers. The reason for drawing this connection is pretty clear, considering that both Ed and Scar's brother attempted human transmutation and created homunculi in this version of events. It also allows for Rose to be brought back in again, and for the show to cut back to her as Scar and Armstrong battle. Despite how disturbed Scar is, we are made to really understand him in even more ways through this. Just as we see his incredibly destructive power, we see the destructive power the government has to harm innocent people like Rose. Comparing this fight with Mangahood, well, it leads to something a bit unfortunate as far as Mangahood's status is concerned. Now, this is a really good fight in Mangahood. Really, it is. 2003 just provided such a strong framework for this fight to work within that it would be hard for Mangahood to match it. But Mangahood does one thing that always bothered me in this moment, and it's kind of present in 2003 as well, even though it's not as noticeable. Somehow, someway, as Ed and Al are fighting Scar and as Scar is about to kill Ed, all these vehicles manage to block Scar's path of escape without him hearing, and they all get their guns out ready to shoot him. I mean, come on. I'm willing to suspend my disbelief, but this bothered me even before I'd seen 2003. It just doesn't make sense. And then after they've all managed to sneak up on him, Mustang decides to shoot a bullet into the air like an idiot? I mean, Mustang, what are you doing? You somehow managed to sneak up on this crazy guy, so just get Hawkeye to shoot him already or something. Why would you give him a warning that you're there? I mean, sure, maybe they didn't want to kill him for some reason, but this whole scene is just ridiculous. And then in all three versions, Mustang decides to antagonize and try to fight Scar, even though it's raining and he can't use his alchemy in the rain. And he doesn't even make the conscious decision to do this. He just forgets that this would happen. Yeah, sure, this results in a pretty funny moment where Hawkeye kicks his feet out from under him and berates him for being so stupid. But it's just hard to believe the Mustang would be this dumb. I don't know. I never thought it fit his character all that much. In Mangahood, I also never understood why all these members with guns are just standing around watching the shit go down. I mean, just shoot Scar already. In 2003, at least they try to hit him, even if their aim's absolutely awful. One thing I'm definitely going to give the manga here is that its page layouts are great. Like, consistently fantastic. And this really helps the fights feel smooth yet exciting and eye-catching. There are many, many pages I could use to get this point across, but I just had to choose one, so I chose page 23 from chapter 7. In the top panel, Scar's arm is at such an angle that it leads our eye to the next panel we're supposed to look at, which shows Scar looking slightly down, which leads us to this leg. The leg is set at a 45-degree angle, which leads us to the image of Hawkeye crouched down. She's staring forward at the next panel we're supposed to look at. The glasses are falling down, which leads our eyes down to the next panel. Since Hawkeye's gun is also acting as an arrow of sorts for our eyes to follow, we are drawn towards the center of the image. This type of work is pretty consistent across the manga, and it makes it an absolute joy to read. It's easy to follow, it's fun, it's dynamic, and I love it. Also, in all three versions, Armstrong and Scar battle, which is always a fun moment to have. In all of the versions, however, I felt that Armstrong acted as a bit too much of a tonal shift from what was going on before he entered, but he's still absolutely ridiculous and a lot of fun. I just don't know if a lot of fun is quite the right feel to go for when we're dealing with this crazy terrorist that's threatening to murder Ed. Armstrong also gives us this silly bit of exposition in every version, which really isn't necessary and I always felt was just a bit unnatural. Who knows though, maybe that's just Armstrong's character and maybe I just have too much of a stick jammed up my ass. However, in 2003 at this point, Ed has not been disarmed. And he actually tries to help Marco escape from the government. I know I've said this a lot, but it's important just how much this comes up in 2003. Ed is, yet again, going against the government in a very, very serious way. Because of this, Marco explains a lot about the war to Ed and Al. In Mangahood, they hear this information after they've been rescued from Scar, and I think they hear it from Mustang. I love how much we get into Marco's mind through this in 2003. He sees the children playing and then it fades to the Ishval War. If I were to rank how well the different versions handled this first section of stuff about the Ishval War, I'd say 2003 is best, the manga is second, and Brotherhood is the worst. A lot of this, once again, is just that 2003 spends more time on these things. There's more time to go through it. And we actually drift back into the past enough to see interactions between Marco, Kimberly, the Jackass, and Mustang. We see the moment where Marco was convinced to give the Philosopher's Stone over for use in the war. And this sequence is fantastic, with the blistering brass playing militantly as we watch the alchemist kill the Ishvalan people, with strings rising into an overwhelming crescendo as Marco falls to his knees and looks at what he's helped create, or rather, helped destroy. And this all culminates with the death of Winry's parents. Of course, it's not 100% clear that these are Winry's parents, but I think a really active viewer would probably be able to piece it together and figure it out based on the info we have up until this point. Or at least they'd be able to figure out that it's a possibility. There's also this really desperate moment where Mustang almost kills himself, but Marco tells him to stop, which just I mean, it's an obvious thing, but it just gives so much character to everybody. In Mangahood, this all goes by much faster, which makes a lot of sense, since both of those versions are going to go and really focus on this war later on. In the manga, we're briefly told about what happened with dark pictures surrounded by white text over a black background. This gives a sense of emptiness and reminiscence that's really necessary for this sort of thing, especially when it's being told to us briefly rather than shown to us for the most part. In Brotherhood, this shaky camera effect is used and the colors are washed out as these ideas are shown to us. Red is left as the only bright color, which is an interesting idea. It does a serviceable job of showing this stuff, but it's definitely meant to be passed over quickly. Do I think this necessarily makes the show worse as a whole with Brotherhood? Not really, not too much. So now it's time for Ed to be disarmed by Scar. In 2003, we get this brief and interesting conversation between Ed and Scar over what equivalent exchange is. It gives us an even deeper sense of the internal conflict going on within Scar, and how his logic does not at all really add up. As Ed basically says, what's the point of your revenge if there's no such thing as equivalent exchange for what you've lost? Scar doesn't have an answer for this. In all three versions, after this goes down, Ed and Al have a little argument over the fact that Ed was willing to sacrifice himself for Al. In 2003, this scene is treated as incredibly serious and there's a lot of weight to it. There isn't any slapstick comedy or large changes in animation style. In the manga, there also isn't any in your face comedy, but there's some little funny things like how you see a line of the military people standing there and watching as Ed and Al argue. But overall, it's treated seriously, as it should be, as it's one of the most serious moments for these brothers. Then there's Brotherhood. Oh, Brotherhood, why do you do this? The sad music plays, and then Al punches Ed, and there's this ridiculous sound effect as he spins into the air, and the music just goes away. And doing that once wasn't enough. They do it again. Before I'd even seen 2003 or read the manga, I was really annoyed with this sequence. It's just, I don't know. It's a scene that's completely serious for our characters. They were almost killed. Can't we just spend a little bit of time being serious before we get back to the gags? Honestly, I found this to be almost disrespectful of the source material, but disrespectful might be too strong of a word for it. Either way, I'm not too happy with this scene. And now, with all of these differences out of the way, 2003 and Mangahood start showing a lot of similarities again, as Ed and Al go back to their hometown and visit Winry and Pinako. There are some funny moments, particularly in 2003, where everyone's saying that they can't escort Ed and Al to their hometown, and it just keeps going back to Armstrong flexing. While there are a few differences in this section really worth noting, at least when this video series already is going to be like 6 hours long, one that stood out to me was that in 2003, Hughes is the one who tells Ed and Al that Scar is the one who killed Nina. Although this is a pretty questionable decision on Hughes' part, it shows us how much he trusts the boys, and it puts him in a position of trust with them. Ed and Al may be becoming more and more secluded and more reliant on themselves, for better or worse, but they still trust Hughes. That gives this moment where he salutes Hughes and apologizes for using his left arm real dramatic weight. Honestly, Hughes just feels like one of the only people Ed would genuinely want to salute to. Of course, this salute is also in Mangahood, but because of the overall context of each series, it just doesn't have the same dramatic weight. Also in Brotherhood, he doesn't apologize for using his left hand. It's a little detail, but I felt that in both the manga and 2003, it showed how much Ed respects Hughes. In 2003, there's also this detour episode, which, while not completely necessary, has some interesting moments. See, Ed and Al get separated because Al is accidentally removed from the train. Mainly, the purpose of this episode is once again to show some character growth on Ed's part, where he goes from really not understanding the horrors of the war to getting some sort of grasp on it. However, it's important to say that he does understand horror. Of course he does. With his mother and all, I think it would be hard not to. But he's realizing that these things are affecting others even if he can't see it, and that these things affect others in different ways. In particular, this is shown through how he lashes out at Armstrong about the Ishval War, telling Armstrong that he heard from Marco about all of the things that happened during the war. Then, while Ed is on his hunt for Al, his automail leg is stolen by this little girl who wants to give it to her grandpa to use. Ed and this man end up discussing the way that horrible things can shape people's lives. In particular, this is shown through how the older man doesn't want to have his legs fixed or to make his life easier, because the loss of his leg and his mobility reminds him of what he did during the Ishval War. Throughout the scene, a clock is set between Ed and this man during certain shots, emphasizing general themes that go along with the passage of time. A sense that Ed could become like this man given his position within the government, or that he could have done what this man did if only he had been a different age, is tied up with this symbol. Along with this is the sense of how much time Ed and Al have spent searching for their bodies. After all, we've been following their quest for years now, and here they still are, searching and searching, trying to fix a stupid, horrible mistake they made. Because of this, Ed even begins to talk about how he's losing faith in the very laws of alchemy, the very laws which have governed so much of his thoughts and actions, including those in the town of Lowart. When the old man says a dream that is granted can't be called a real dream at all, we get the sense that Ed has some real thinking to do, and that he needs to confront himself. His purpose for all these years has been to get his and his brother's bodies back. What's he gonna do once that's done? What will be the point of his existence? He's been defined by this tragedy for so long, after all. I love Ed's characterization in 2003 so much. And then Ed and Al are back in their little hometown. I think this little breather's important, especially since Mangahood and 2003 are going to be taking a turn for the worse soon. And this is a great way of reminding us of Winry's role within the story, especially in Mangahood, where she plays more of a major role than she does in 2003. Honestly, though, none of the versions have any huge differences in them that I really feel warrant going through in any sort of large detail. It's a decent section of the story. We see more of Winry and Pinako, as I mentioned, and also in 2003, this dog laughs, which I don't know, it's just a little bit freaky, you know? In 2003, one important thing is also that Winry sees inside Ed's pocket watch at this point. She doesn't see that until later, and if you look inside the pocket watch, it says October 3rd, not October 13th. It's a lifetime opportunity. One cool little thing in Brotherhood, though, is that Al is consistently paired with animals in this episode. There are just these random shots where Al is sitting with animals, and these shots just come and go as they please. Personally, I think this pairing is meant to, first of all, show us Al's calm nature. But second, I also think it's meant to show us that Al is losing a bit of his humanity, or at least his ability to relate to other people. It's definitely showing us a certain distance between him and Ed, at least, and I really liked this little addition in Brotherhood. However, in 2003, we actually hear Al explicitly talking about how he can't remember people's faces. We watch him as he grows further and further from his former self. We've seen him grow a lot so far in 2003, even if it has been less than Ed. And 2003 does a fantastic job of showing how confused Al is with these changes. In some ways, this is a pretty normal existential crisis. In other ways, this is Al experiencing growing up while also not knowing how many of these strange struggles stem from his soul being attached to armor, and how much of it just stems from, growing up. 2003 also adds in a little anecdote about how Ed and Al's mom would always shine a light from the window on their second floor, telling them to come home once it got dark out. As they head back to Winry's home, Winry is doing the same thing. What's going on here is pretty obvious, but the sentiment of this moment is really sweet all the same. Even if Ed and Al have burned down their own home, even if their mom's dead and gone and they've changed so much, they will always have a home to return to with Winry. Considering what's going to happen in Conqueror of Shambhala, this is pretty tragic, but we'll be getting to Conqueror of Shambhala in another 4 hours or so into this analysis. Regardless of what situation I've gotten myself into with this series, I'm going to keep pressing forward. We're just gonna run towards the horizon. We're gonna finish this. We're gonna be victorious, guys. Wait. No. Not another short person joke. Not another. There's so many of them. There's so many short person jokes. Do you know how many short person jokes I've read and watched in the past 5 days? Do you know the pain it causes me? Listen, I know this is self-inflicted, but why? Why do we repeat the same joke over and over and over?
Oh, Ed, you're so short. Oh, you're the Fullmetal Alchemist. Who's that shrimp?
Somebody save me. from this nightmare. Then there's the fact that I could have had this uploaded on October 3rd if I'd remember the right day.
Stupid fat Lowart, you forgot to upload the damn video.
Shut up, Gollum, why are you here? The next thing that happens in each version of the story is that Ed and Al discover that the library where Marco's research was has been destroyed. In 2003 in the manga, this is treated as understandably serious and genuinely bad. I mean, it's not focused on as the most grim of moments or anything like that, but it's at least not treated as outright comical. You know, this is kind of serious business. The boys have their first serious lead and then it's just gone. But my good friend Brotherhood is back at it again, because this moment is treated as a joke, as something funny, which I honestly just don't understand. Why go through with these sorts of tonal shifts? Why alter the way your characters are framed within their own story so dramatically? In general, I feel that tone in a work of fiction should try to match the characters' mindsets of the scenes they're in. If your character's happy but the tone's depressing, that's probably not good and it's going to be kind of strange. However, if your character's emotionally crutched but the tone is comical, well, that's equally bad. And unless we're looking at something like a black comedy or, that sort of thing, that's probably not the best idea. The circumstances wherein the library is burnt down are also quite important. In 2003, the burning down is a bit accidental and caused by the fight Scar has with Lust and Gluttony inside the library. In Mangahood, Lust purposely burns it down. While the end result of this isn't all that different, it places the homunculi in a different position in the story. In 2003, they may be manipulating things, but they aren't in complete control. In Mangahood, they are in a lot more control in this general situation, or at least to the audience it feels like they are. This makes them feel a little bit less human in Mangahood. In 2003, they immediately have some sort of weaknesses. They can slip up, they can make mistakes. We're learning that much early on. And it's an idea that's going to be returned to more frequently and in more serious ways in 2003 than it is in Mangahood. Although Mangahood's also going to get to that, mainly with greed. Of course, after Ed and Al find out the library has been burnt down, they find Sheshka, who helps them out by rewriting the whole book. Some part of me always felt that this was just a bit too convenient and kind of ridiculous. But I should probably just stop being such a hard ass. As far as somewhat random means of propelling a plot forward are concerned, this is by no means horrible. Then the boys get down to cracking this code that Marco's left behind. In Brotherhood, I really like how we see Ed and Al start to make these really obscure and strange connections. It's a nice way of showing how much work this is going to be, and just how smart they are. Meanwhile, in the manga, I really like the fact that we get a little rundown of how each alchemist organized their notes. In particular, I like that Mustang codes his by using women's names. What a sly, sexy bastard that man is. As Ed and Al are going through and trying to figure things out, Hughes comes to visit them in each version. In 2003, this had a really big emotional impact for me. Ed just looks so happy to see him, and Ed just really opens up around him, It's genuinely touching, and I love that 2003 makes me feel these feelings. However, despite his comparative lack of emphasis in Mangahood, he's still incredibly lickable? Oh look, I spelled likable wrong in my notes. Lickable. Well, that's fine. Hughes is lickable now. One problem that really stood out to me around now in the show was just how much Brotherhood has been reusing pieces from its soundtrack. Brotherhood has a sizable soundtrack, and I've downloaded it actually and listened to it quite a lot, so I'm not sure why they're reusing the same pieces so much. And while I enjoy Brotherhood's music, it's just not as emotionally gripping or dynamic as 2003's music. Brotherhood has a good soundtrack, don't get me wrong, but 2003 has one of the best soundtracks I've ever heard. Of course, now is when Ed and Al discover the truth of the Philosopher's Stone, that you can create one using human lives as the fuel. In general, this is just such a crushing moment.